Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, and thank you for joining. Today's webinar, titled HPP and Food Waste, Get Your Products Tasted, Not Wasted, is brought to you by Universal Pasteurization and Cold Storage, and is a part of a series of webinars leading up to our 2017 HPP Summit. My name is Toyin Adana Bell. I'm the Director of Marketing at Universal, and I'm happy and thankful to be joined by Joyce Longfield and Sarah Kolansky for today's presentation. Each of them bring a unique perspective in the subject of food waste and sustainability. A quick note before we start, we are recording this session and we'll be able to share the slides and recording with you all after the webinar is over. And there will be a live Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please type in your questions into the GoToWebinar panel, and we will save all the questions to the end. And so with that, we'll start with Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you, Toyin. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Well, I'm happy to be a part of this webinar today on food waste and reducing climate change. This has been a real important issue of mine that came up in the last couple of years, and I'll get into that a little bit later on when I start talking about my section. For now, a bit of background on myself. For the last 6 years, I've been a consultant within the HPP industry, focusing primarily on the food safety and the regulatory side of things, assisting companies with validation study to demonstrate the efficacy of HPP in meeting regulatory requirements for FDA, USDA, Health Canada, and even somewhat overseas as well. My background is in molecular biology, but I have a passion for food and nutrition, so being involved with HPP was an excellent way to blend the best of both worlds. As of now, I'm continuing on this path by helping to launch the Cold Pressure Council, and a part of that council will be a Cold Pressure Local program, which is the first of its kind, and that it'll be geared towards a food safety side of it, to again just demonstrate to the consumer the efficacy of HPP. So with that, I'm happy to be a part of this webinar with my industry colleague Sarah, and I will now move it on to her so she can give some background on herself.
Thanks, Joyce. My name is Sarah Kolansky. I'm the Associate Director of Sustainability at Graham Partners. I work on environmental, social, and governance matters throughout our investment portfolio. My background is in civil and environmental engineering, so I spent my undergrad studying water and wastewater and the environmental impacts from that. And I worked in consulting for federal agencies, so I consulted with the EPA and USDA on many different upstream and downstream environmental impacts. So working with the EPA inventory, studying the yard trimmings and food scraps, inventory of greenhouse gas emissions, and also on the waste incineration side, and what that is doing, contributing to climate change. And then worked with the USDA on emissions from agriculture, so things like cropland, grazing land, enteric fermentation, which is from the stomachs of cows, and manure management, and what those upstream emissions are from the food production system. So really opened my eyes to these impacts, and during my master's degree in environmental studies, studied the environmental impacts of food production, specifically on lettuce production. And so just studying this food, energy, water nexus really opened my eyes to all of these impacts. So I'll start off today by giving an introduction to the issue of food waste and giving you some data and information about it. And then I'll go into where this food waste is happening throughout the supply chain. And Joyce will then talk about shelf life extension and what you can do to prevent food waste, specifically on HPP and the cold chain. We'll talk about the benefits of reducing food waste to food producers, retailers, and quick serve restaurants. And then we'll have as Toyin mentioned, a Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can post them on the questions section there, and we'll answer them at the end. So I'd like to start off by showing this video that shows, that was done by the Ad Council, that shows the journey that a strawberry takes throughout from farm to consumer, and it really gives a good sense for all that goes into the food production supply chain. So you can see, I'm not sure if the sound is working there, but you can see, in the growing stage, there's a lot of labor that goes into it, and then once it gets packaged, it goes through the cold chain. You can see a lot of energy and labor that's involved in this process, even before it gets onto the grocery store shelf. Eventually, it has this relationship with a lime next door. And so it gets flown across the country, goes through this whole process. It eventually makes it onto the grocery store shelf. It sits there. Someone makes the decision to purchase it. And it makes it eventually into the home. And all of this going into one package of strawberries. And so it makes it into the home, gets put in the back of the refrigerator, and I think it cut off there, but it ends up going into the trash. And so all of this energy, all of this labor, all of this water that goes into producing this package of strawberries, and it ends up just going into the trash. So it's shipped across the country and it goes into the trash. So so it's really staggering numbers that the amount of food waste that happens in the U.S. and globally. In the U.S. we have the infrastructure in place, the cold chain infrastructure in place, but that the developing countries do not have. But still, there's a lot of food that is wasted. So every day we waste enough food to fill all the seats in the Rose Bowl Stadium, and I think that that's just a really eye-opening statistic, one that really has stuck in my mind throughout my studies of this issue. Our value of food has really changed, and I think that that's a lot of the root cause for this issue. During World War I, food was seen as a valuable resource, and saving food was seen as contributing to the war effort. So there were campaigns to spread the word about food waste and how wives at home could be helping the war effort by reducing food waste, not even reducing food waste, but just reducing food consumption. Eat less bread and help the fleet. It was just this image that you at home could be contributing to a greater good by your food purchases. And so it's really changed since then. Now we see our calories are really cheap, food is abundant, and we don't value food in the same way. At the same time, we have this image of this perfect produce that must be on the shelf when you walk through the grocery store, and that's not how Mother Nature creates the food. Not all food is perfect, and so a lot of the food waste is coming out of these imperfect produce. So these bananas that don't have the right curvature, or an apple that might be a little lopsided. And so we're really combating a lot of issues here on the food waste front. There's been a movement to push for understanding this idea that food doesn't have to be perfect, that food isn't created by Mother Nature perfectly every time. And there's been this imperfect produce campaign that's going on. Whole Foods and Walmart are now selling at a slightly discounted rate this food that is imperfect. And there are a lot of food startups that have popped up that are trying to connect this wasted food with people and companies that will use it. So whether or not it's making juice out of apples and carrots that are imperfect or that would have otherwise been wasted, or trying to connect food waste from grocery stores to a food bank nearby that could use it. There are a lot of startups that have come about, and so this issue is really on consumers' mind, and we're really seeing it be at the forefront of consumers using their wallets to support these organizations. So I'll give you some facts about food waste, and this image on the right is from a documentary called Just Eat It, if you're interested in watching it. It's about a pair that decided to only eat rejected produce and food for an entire year. And so they basically dumpster dove for their food for a year, and it wasn't that they were eating moldy food. They were eating food that was rejected because it was too close to the sell-by date for the grocery store to sell it or something. Or here you can see all these bananas that were wasted for some reason. There was some miscommunication in how much they needed, and they overordered or whatever it is. So it's a really interesting documentary. But anyway, so about 31% of our food is wasted. 131 billion pounds of food was not available for human consumption in 2010. And so this is just a staggering number. 31%. If any company was having 31% waste in computers or in paper or whatever you're selling, if you had 31% of waste, that would be completely unacceptable. And so this is just staggering numbers that we have here. It's $161 billion of food that is thrown in a landfill each year. About 1,200 calories per day per person that is going into a landfill. And so I think everybody kind of sees this as something that I can't be, there's no way that I'm doing this at home. But if you really take a look at your food habits, it's clear that it's happening everywhere, even at the consumer level. So there's really just a disconnect between this. You want to go to the next slide. There's a disconnect between the food that's wasted and the people that are hungry. We're wasting 30% of food, yet we have 50 million people in the U.S. alone that are living in food insecure households. They're either not sure where their next meal is coming from, or they do not have access to the nutrition that they need. And so they're eating packaged goods and low density nutritious food. And so a lot of the food that's wasted is fresh fruits and vegetables, things that are high in nutrition, yet we're wasting it, and it's going into a landfill, and people on the other side of the city or on the other side of the road are going hungry. So there's really just this incredible disconnect that's going on in the food system. And not only that, there are environmental impacts from this. Today we're using 70% of our fresh water for irrigation, 38% of our land, and about 30% of energy consumption for food alone in the world. And so if you convert that to what is actually going into a landfill, you're talking about 300 million barrels of oil that are going into a landfill. Not that are going into food production, but just that we might as well dump all this oil into a landfill. It's about 4% of U.S. oil consumption, and about a quarter of all fresh water is going into a landfill. Never gets to the human mouth. So it's incredible environmental impacts that we're seeing from this food waste problem. And on the climate change front, there are this food that goes into a landfill breaks down in an anaerobic environment and creates methane gas. Methane, which is 23 times more potent than 1 molecule of CO2 in terms of its greenhouse gas potential, global warming potential, and its ability to capture heat in the atmosphere. And it accounts for 25% of all U.S. methane emissions. So people often think of a way to reduce their environmental impact is to reduce their beef consumption, for example, because of the methane that's created from cows. And that is a big contributor to climate change and accounts for about 233 metric tons of CO2 equivalents million metric tons of CO2 equivalents every year in the US, but landfills is about half of that. And most of the landfill emissions are coming from organic material that breaks down. And so, you think about reducing your meat consumption as a way to be a good steward of the environment, but really the food waste issue is, that's just capturing the downstream emissions, but that doesn't even capture the upstream emissions that go into the food. The landfill methane here. So really, environmentally minded people are really thinking about food waste now. We also have a skewed perception about being a good steward of the environment, again, here on the disposal side. So often people think about composting as the best way to reduce your impact. But composting is really just one step above disposal in terms of being the best practice. So really the source reduction is at the top of the pyramid, and we should be thinking about that first. So that food shouldn't have gone to waste in the first place. It's great if you can put it into a composting bin. It's better than going into your trash, but really we should be thinking about reducing it in the first place. We shouldn't be creating the need for this food in the first place, rather than it going to compost. So we're seeing throughout the supply chain, food waste is happening from all different sectors. Fruits and vegetables are big contributors to it, seafood, meat and dairy, and it's happening mostly in the upstream, in the production side, and that's happening on the field and during processing like that. And then really it's at the distribution and consumer levels that the food waste is happening. And so I think that this gives a good sense for where along the supply chain it's happening and what products you're seeing most of. So I'll turn it over to Joyce, who's going to talk about what you can do to prevent food waste.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for the introduction. So before jumping into it, I just wanted to follow up with what I was talking about in my background, how I became interested in reducing food waste and preventing climate change. Happened about 2 years ago when I was at the University of Cornell to give a presentation on HPP and innovative products you can do with it. And I heard John Mandyke speak about food waste and the impact that it has on climate change. And I sat there in the audience feeling rather stupid and naive that I hadn't been aware to the impact that food waste was having on climate change. Having been working in the food industry for about 4 years, I just was not aware of these facts and the impact that it was having. And since then, it's been a passion and a focus of mine to help spread the message as much as possible on how we can help to reduce food waste. And there was a key takeaway message from John Mandyke's presentation, which was the biggest impact we can have on reducing food waste is extending shelf life and refrigeration. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that's exactly what HPP goes hand in hand with. And so that's what I'm going to focus more on my part of this presentation is, as food manufacturers, how can we extend shelf life and how can we, incorporate refrigeration to help reduce food waste. And so my areas of focus are going to be on prevention, saving money and time, and then protecting both the environment and your brand. So for the first part, prevention, just kind of touching back on what Sarah was talking about on the key areas that have the greatest impact on food waste, typically are at the home. And as food manufacturers, there's not much we can do to help reduce that other than through education. But at the same time, I feel that using something like HPP to help extend the shelf life and bring more awareness to a reliable, saleable date could help in reducing the amount of food that consumers are going to throw out. HPP isn't applicable for every area, but when we look at, how much we require from a resource perspective on certain food groups, such as meat or fruits and vegetables, it puts a great constraint and demand on our freshwater supply and just our agricultural system to make these foods. So HPP is not necessarily applicable for a whole fruit or a leafy green salad, but there's definitely applications for, chopped salads like coleslaws and potato salads, or cut up fruit in cups and so forth. And even in the meat section, which I talk about a little bit more, there's definitely huge applications there. And so if we could just educate our consumer a little bit more about HPP and the shelf life that it provides, then they can be more comfortable with accepting what is put on the package and not thinking, well, this company doesn't really know if this is good or not. And so I think that there's an opportunity for food manufacturers to properly educate their consumers and being more reliable on the sellable dates that we have on our products. And for a company, using HPP can help save on money and time. So Sarah touched a bit about this in an earlier slide, that there's about $162 billion worth of food that's wasted. And when you look at the categories in the breakdown, really HPP kind of applies to 7 out of these 8 categories. It doesn't really apply to fats and oils, and you might question why it would apply to grains, but now we see a lot of ready-to-eat foods like cooked grain salads and cooked oatmeal that's in the refrigerated space, because our shoppers for many years have been moving away from shelf stable and moving more into the refrigerated space. So we're seeing a lot of these freshly prepared meals, and a lot of them again aren't utilizing technology like HPP to help extend the shelf life. So they're being thrown out, in a couple days after they're made, and that's just contributing to this large number. So HPP could help even address foods like that, but in particular, with meat, HPP products, about 30% of that is from ready-to-eat meats. Other areas, ready-to-eat dips and this kind of thing. So HPP could definitely have a huge impact on reducing this number, as well as refrigeration. So one example that I've provided here in how specifically HPP can help a company save money. This is just a really simple example, but it's actually very impactful, in particular for a growing area of an HPP product, which are cold pressed juices or raw juices. So, traditionally a raw juice has a 3 to 5 day shelf life. It has a nasty warning label on it that you have to be aware you're potentially consuming a product that has pathogens. So HPP eliminates that risk to the consumer. But it also extends the shelf life of this product up to at least 10 days. So when you look at the simple rationale that I have provided here for, say, a juice manufacturer over the course of 30 days, if they are not using HPP and they're throwing out their product every 3 days, and assuming that they're wasting about 10% of that, come 30 days, they're going to waste about 100 pounds of produce, because if it takes 100 pounds of apples just to get 50 pounds of juice, and then you end up throwing away 10% of that every 3 days, after 30 days, you basically threw out a whole day's worth of production. So you've wasted all that money, all that time, and all that food and all the other raw materials just to throw it out once every 30 days. Whereas if you use extended your shelf life by 10 times that amount, then really you're looking at, wasting 100 pounds of product every 300 days and not every 30 days. So in doing so, in using HPP and being able to know that you have a greater shelf life extension, now this is going to help you to become more efficient in planning your production schedule. You can order larger quantities. You can order them at better price times throughout the year, or say even better quality times, in particular with fruits. There's definitely certain seasonal peaks, and if you can buy larger amounts, you could juice all of them and you could HPP them, and then store them and use them throughout the month or even the year, depending on how you actually storage them, so you can have better inventory management and less waste. There's many efficiencies that can be gained with shelf life extension, and a lot of times people think that moving to a technology like HPP is just about improving your bottom line, but really you can see that if you can get into better efficiencies, it's going to be better for your entire business model, and it's also going to help for reducing waste. Which then leads me to the next subject. As a food manufacturer, how can you share this with your consumer, right? Right now we're in a time of very impactful social media, and so our consumers are very in tune with what a company is doing, like what are their social responsibilities. And as food manufacturers, it's a growing on food waste. And so when we revisit some of the topics that Sarah had touched on before, we're wasting about 1.3 billion tons of food, which could feed 1.6 billion people. And that example is just crazy when you think of how much we're wasting and how many people are starving in this world. But if you take it even a step back as a food manufacturer, if that's the amount of food that we're wasting, then we might as well have not even made it in the first place when you think of all the other drains on the resources. And we touched on wasting the fresh water, and then the other piece is our carbon footprint. So when we think of the impact that our carbon footprint has on food manufacture, again, something like meat has the largest impact on our carbon footprint, but so do fruits and vegetables, so they can't be forgotten either. And so when you tie in the carbon footprint and the saving of freshwater resources, and also just preventing less food waste in order to reduce our climate change impact overall, we can see how the benefit of HPP, which essentially shelf life extension, and refrigeration can help reduce all three of these components. And for a company to be able to tell that story to their consumer, it has a really nice story to be told, and which gives the company, a bit of a halo, a bit of a highlight. And underliningly, what it's also doing is it's protecting the company by using HPP, by preventing foodborne illness, which I touched on before. So using HPP to extend the shelf life is one component of it for cost savings, but also the other benefit of being able to prevent any type of pathogens in the product. And even though it doesn't seem like a really big number in a country of 300 million people, but needs to be every year due to foodborne illness. And when we look at the social or the economical cost that this is having on this country, $152 billion, that's almost the same amount as the food waste. So in total, we're looking at about $300 billion that's just being wasted because of both foodborne illness and food waste. So two areas that HPP could help reduce this huge price tag while providing brand protection and while reducing our food waste impact. And I wanted to include this slide just to kind of reinforce the impact that social media is having nowadays, and why it is important for food manufacturers to really start to tell this story of what they're doing to reduce food waste. It's as our responsibility. So, you know, a consumer, a small chance of it that they might not rebuy your product and they might complain, but there's a really great chance now through social media that they're going to talk about how they were unhappy with it or the short shelf life. So again, you know, this is just another reason why, as a food manufacturer, we should consider using something like HPP and in order to help reduce the amount of food waste that we're creating with our products. And going back to this slide that Sarah had put up before, as a consumer, we've been primarily focused on composting, but as food manufacturers, we can actually start at the top of this pyramid, which is with the reduction. And using something like HPP and maintaining the cold chain through refrigeration can help at the top of the pyramid and not get all the way down to the composting and the disposal, which is more at the consumer level. So with that, I guess I will open it up to, or give it back to Toyin to kind of lead the Q&A portion of this.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. Thank you again, Sarah. A lot of great information there. And we've actually just started getting a couple of questions. So quick reminder to our audience, if you could please go to the GoToWebinar panel and input your questions, and we'll start reading those out in a second. So the first question goes to Joyce, and Sarah, certainly, you know, chime in if you have any feedback. But it's kind of like a consumer slanted question, but do you guys think that the increase in shelf life using technologies like HPP will then start to reduce markdowns and discounting at the retail level?
I think it would, but again, I strongly emphasize the need for education. It's something that I've been trying to talk to HPP users for all 6 years that I've been doing this, is the education piece. And I understand it's a really difficult piece. It's not really the nicest, you know, food manufacturing equipment to talk about. Even the name itself kind of sounds like a negative, you know, reference HPP. But as now moving forward with the HPP Council, that's definitely going to be a huge part of my role with the council, is the consumer awareness and acceptance and potentially desire to seek out and look for HPP treated products. And I think a big piece of that will be because of the reliability in the expiration date that would be on the product.
I'll just chime in a little bit too. Just HPP isn't necessarily the end solution. I think that there needs to be education around the food waste issue as well. If you extend the shelf life, it doesn't 100% mean that the consumer will not waste the product. So I think that there needs to be continued education around the issue of food waste so that the consumer is more aware of it and has a greater value on food and is more inclined to eat the food before it goes to waste. So I think that's an important component as well.
Thank you. Next question was, outside of any data that has been shared on this presentation, are there any other food waste statistics that have kind of shocked you, blown your mind, that you've learned over the years?
Is that for either of us?
Yeah, I would say either of you.
You know, the numbers are staggering. That's the piece of it that just blew my mind the first time that I heard John Van Dyke talk, and it still just boggles my mind how we can be so nonchalant to just throw something in the garbage. And it's made me incredibly more aware of it now, about finishing things on my plate, about not buying more than what I need. So in terms of numbers, I think we really represented all of them quite well. I'm sure that there's many more out there. One in particular that I remember was that if we were to take all of the greenhouse gases that food waste produces, we'd be the third largest country in the world. First with, I think it's the US, and then second it would be China, and then third it would be food waste from greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I would second that. That is pretty staggering. I think that the other thing that astonishes me is the amount that's wasted on a retail level. I can't believe that you walk into a grocery store and all the food is there and looking beautiful, and you don't really think about all the food that's in front of you that doesn't get wasted, as Joyce mentioned, and I feel the same way. It's hard to go through life and not think about it. Anytime you're at a buffet or anything, it's hard to not have this be a reminder to you once you learn about it and once you study it. So yeah, I think that I see it in my everyday life now, at the retail level when I'm grocery shopping, or when I'm out to dinner with friends and others at the table might waste half their plate of pasta or something, and you just are constantly reminded of the impacts of people's small decisions. So I challenge you all on the call to think about that in your everyday life too.
Yeah, thanks for that. I certainly will be after listening to today's webinar. Joyce, question in for you. How does the use of HPP impact the type of packaging that may be required for foods?
Yeah, and there's definitely better ways that packaging can make HPP more efficient, which again, all just kind of helps tie into, saving the company money and being more efficient, which, everything ties back into keeping food waste a minimum. So, the more bulkier the packaging, then the less efficient HPP is going to be. It is a cylinder, so you have to think about that. So if you have like some kind of square rectangle package or some kind of bulky tub and you try and put that into the cylinder, it's not going to fill the cylinder very well. It's going to have a lot of gaps, and that's going to be less efficient. It also makes the machine work harder, which costs you more money in the end as well. So the more you can fill up that cylinder, then that is going to be your most efficient. And again, a really easy example is if you have some kind of a pouch, whether that be for juice or something, a pouch is going to fill the space within a cylinder very nicely. If it's not a pouch, when you think of, in the case of deli meats, and you've got a vacuum sealed pack, that again is going to fill the space really, really well, because you can just compact everything together and you're not worried about the appearance or things getting squished and so forth. But anytime you want something that's more aesthetically appealing, like matte packaging or even a nice container, which is a rigid shape, that is going to be, obviously more expensive just on the packaging. Putting through HPP, it's not as efficient. So again, part of this whole consumer education piece is, well, we don't use this type of packaging because of right? That could be a part of a brand story, that we are minimalists and we're using minimalistic packaging to be the most efficient and keep our costs down. I think that consumers are more open to that story than having something that's aesthetically appealing.
Thank you, Joyce. We're now coming to the end of our time. So I wanted to just say another big thank you to our speakers. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate this great informative information. Thanks to our audience. Thank you for spending the time. As a follow-up to this webinar, for anybody who is registered, we will send you an email that contains the slides and the audio recording of the session, so you can listen back to it. You can share it with your team members. If you have any further questions beyond today, we are available. So, feel free to send us an email. So you can email Joyce, Sarah, or contact somebody at the Universal team if you have specific questions around food waste, or what your company can do to kind of reduce your footprint. If you have specific questions about HPP, certainly feel free to reach out to the team at Universal Pasteurization directly. When we send out the slides, we will include this series of food waste resources. So we've got links to a couple of movies here. The USDA has some great information around food waste, so as the EPA. So you'll be able to look through this information. But thank you once again. And we will catch you on our next webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, Joanne.